time that we did is when I had the surgery on my foot. And I
Yeah.
those first few weeks, she was not a happy individual.
Ooh, I like that little.
Piggyback.
Yeah, I see what you're doing there. That's slick.
We'll start as soon as you're ready.
Just waiting on you, Nikki.
Lion shot him.
Finished Night of the Seven Kingdoms.
Did you watch it
this morning? Pretty disappointed. Trying to get into Game of Thrones.
Yeah, well, winter is coming.
King of the North.
In the North.
Why were there so many kings?
It was the Seven Kingdoms.
I know.
They were all fighting for the main throne.
Can't we just have one?
That was
They'll
the
just
plot
get
of the
along.
show.
Well, it's the short road to totalitarianism right there.
Well, it was feudal times.
How many kings do we have in Tennessee?
I mean, what?
How many kings do we have in Tennessee right now?
Too many.
Yeah. Enough.
Yeah, I know.
That's a good deal.
I guess sovereignty is a state of mind.
How
in the
early did you have to
legislature.
get, that's a great
All
one.
right.
How early did you have to get up this morning?
Well, you ready?
Better than I got.
I was already got it.
Still good. All right, all right, and roll, good gentlemen.
Mine's taking a second. Okay.
I want to start today just by noting my personal and I think most of my colleagues' appreciation for Lieutenant Governor Randy McNally, who announced his retirement after dedicating the better part of his life to serving this state. That is something that we should all honor. Despite this is a time of significant political disagreements across the state and across the country, but under Lieutenant Governor McNally's leadership, the Tennessee Senate remained a place where those disagreements were had respectfully and openly. And we don't see that all the time in our politics, but he served as an institutional leader that I think held back some of the worst instincts that we see in politics that go towards personalization, that go towards shutting down debate, that go towards shutting the public out from the space. And I think that he served a strong institutional example. There's no question that I've had more political and policy disagreements with him over the years than I have had agreements. But we've always had a relationship that's built on respect, on a common love for the state, on a common desire to serve the state, and a common hope that the Senate can actually serve that role well and nobly. And I will miss him personally, and I think that almost every member of the Senate and lots of citizens across Tennessee, even if they don't think so and even if they don't know so, will actually miss having that leadership. So, and it's going to be really quite interesting to see. It's a sort of the shift. It's a change in eras, and it's going to be very interesting to see if the leadership that comes next can live up to that example. But rare in these weekly partisan press conferences. But I do want to start today just by acknowledging his leadership, and personally wish him and his wife Jan the very best in their retirement and future.
On that note, do you have any thoughts on who should fill that role?
I know you're here because you think I'm going to be. No. Right.
So you had any?
Right. No, if drafted, I would not. Right. No. Pure Sherman statement there. Look, I mean, I think it's going to be a very interesting. People have been. There's no question that under Tennessee's laws and rules, the speakers of the two chambers have significantly more power than I think the public realizes. They have the ability to really shape a lot of how this building works and a lot of how policies get made. And so while it's a debate that happens, within the 33 members of the Senate and largely within caucuses of that body, it's a debate that will matter a lot for everyone. So I think it's something that matters a great deal. My hope, regardless, is that the Senate sort of tries to maintain its role as being a place where, look, with everybody, I don't think anybody's looking for a place where one side gets to win fights. Certainly not me, but I do think you want to maintain it as a place where people can respectfully disagree, where people feel like their voices are going to be represented regardless of where they are in the state, and a place where if you're here on a school trip or you're here because you've got an actual problem, you want to come to a place that treats you with respect. And the leadership of the body is really important to maintaining that. And so, I think it's a really important decision. I hope that my colleagues, both across the board, will take that decision seriously, because it's one that will matter a great deal for the future of the state.
Well, since the House was pretty boring this week with this bizarre calendar that was created. I don't often talk about what happens in D.C. that often, but this year we find ourselves in a situation where the White House is dictating the policy priorities of the legislature, quite honestly. And I think we've been talking about that in recent weeks. From the immigration bills are being directly controlled, written, and handled and approved by the White House. And so this week I found it interesting to talk about, because the White House is in such control of dictating Tennessee policy. I thought it would be fair just to look at what was said in the State of the Union address this week and contrast that with reality. Because the people who are in the White House, inhabit the White House, obviously have a big impact on and represent what is believed among the entire Republican Party. And this week in the State of the Union address, the President said, and these are quotes, "This is the golden age of America. Today, inflation is plummeting. Incomes are rising fast. The roaring economy is roaring like never before. Prices are plummeting downward. I took prescription drugs, a very big part of healthcare, from the highest price in the entire world to the lowest." Every one of those statements is false. Every single sentence is false, and it's a reflection of how out of touch today's Republican Party is with what is happening in our communities around the state. Last week I read to you a letter from Miss Iris about, "My prices are going up. I cannot afford to live. Please do something." That is the sentiment that I hear in the communities that I represent and Senator Yarborough represents every single day. Meanwhile, the White House and our colleagues across the aisle here in the state legislature truly believe that this is the golden age of America and that prices are going down. I have quoted from the Boyd Center's economic report to the governor multiple times this year. I'll spare you that again, but it contradicts everything the president said as far as Tennessee goes. And I will touch on these highlights, though. According to the USDA, grocery inflation has continued to climb in Tennessee still today, with Thanksgiving meal costs last year rising to the highest levels since 2021. Basic, highly consumed meats such as beef roast and ground beef continue to spike in Tennessee, 73.8% and 52.5% higher since 2020. Consumers are shopping less frequently to manage costs, according to the data. Medical and drug claims in Tennessee have risen by 25% over the past 5 years and continue to climb, drug prices being a primary cause of that. 51% of Tennesseans polled recently are worried about affording their prescription drugs, according to Healthcare Value Hub. The 2022 Inflation Reduction Act, to the extent any prices are stabilizing, is responsible for lowering some costs for seniors because they created negotiations for certain price drops of certain highly used drugs and capped Medicare out-of-pocket costs, and now this president's trying to take credit for some of that. Median rents are hovering still between $1,100 and $1,400, and as high as $2,100 and $2,600 a month in Nashville and Knoxville. In January 2026, the average home price in the state was $385,000. Of course, in Nashville and other areas around this region and other urban areas, it's much higher. The 30-year fixed rates are averaging between 5.875% and 6.55% and are projected to stay above 6% through 2026. We have to be honest with the American people and with the people of Tennessee. Things are not going great. People are still struggling. Families are struggling to pay for basic necessities. Health care or home ownership is down, not only because of mortgage rates, but because incomes are flattening and not keeping up with inflation. As inflation, contrary to what the president said, continues to increase. These are the facts, and these are the issues on which we continue to focus in our respective Democratic caucuses. And I can't emphasize enough, when you have a White House that is so out of touch, that is controlling the policy of the Tennessee General Assembly, we are left to believe, and we know, that our colleagues across the aisle in this body are just as out of touch. And that's why you don't see any substantive policy from them to lower cost across the board, to address affordable housing, to address wages, to address these issues that matter to Tennessee families that are impacting them on a daily basis. And that is truly unfortunate. That is a waste. And here in the House, unlike the Senate, we just took the entire week off. I think it was probably to buy time to wait on approval from the White House on some legislation because they were occupied with the State of the Union this week. So we're sitting around and waiting around, sitting on our hands for the White House to give our colleagues across the aisle permission to move forward with whatever legislation they wrote for them. We have got to get back to basics. We have got to refocus on our volunteer values and lower costs for working families across the board. And that's what we still stand here. Our colleagues that aren't with us today are ready and willing to work across the aisle on these issues because that's what matters. That's what we hear about. That's why we ran for office, to improve people's quality of life, to fix problems, not create more. And so it's truly unfortunate that even our highest levels of government, our elected officials, are so out of touch that they don't realize how much people are struggling every single day across this state, including our governor. We'll take any questions here.
Well, speaking of a bill, an amendment is put forward to allegedly fix a problem of need according to the Republican caucus. Is the amendment to Senate Bill 2205, House Bill 2450, that would create a new state authority, the Subterranean Infrastructure Coordination Authority, that would essentially put regulatory authority and oversight of the building and using city loop into one body, with the members being appointed by the Speaker of the House, Speaker of the Senate, and the Governor. Looks to be on the fast track in the Senate. The Speaker of the House said he supports this as well. It takes politics out of a very important transportation project, he says. I wonder what your gentleman's take is on this bill with regarding a project that Representative, you and I talked about this summer, concerned there's a lack of transparency. And now it appears that all the regulatory oversight would sit in one committee as digging is now underway. Do you have concerns with that authority being created?
Yes. I mean, the bill hasn't come across me yet, and it hasn't gotten much movement in the House that I know of at this time, and it kind of caught me by surprise when the amendment surfaced last week. And then, of course, Senator Yarborough and his colleagues dealt with it first. But anytime you remove authority from local governments on an issue of this importance, that removes their say in what's happening in our own town or under our own town is inherently problematic. And taking politics out of it is really, I mean, you're wanting a hand-selected group of leaders from one party appointing a board to tell a city what's going to happen underneath its most important infrastructure and the economic base of the entire region. We have a lot of inherent problems here in Nashville. I mean, when you look what's all is going on underground in this city, I think it requires some expertise. from a lot of people and a lot of input from both state and local officials, quite honestly, because the people of Tennessee and this city, I mean, the people of Nashville and this city itself and our local economy deserves to be protected. And all of that is potentially going to be put in jeopardy by just some hand-picked people that we have no idea who they may or may not be and whether they have any knowledge or expertise in this area. I mean, we don't even know if the people running the boring company have any expertise in this area, and evidence tends to indicate that they don't, because they don't even know what's under this city. And there's a lot going on under this city that people don't know about, and that raises a lot of concerns for me, but I'll turn it over.
I mean, look, in some ways it's interesting that legislation got filed at all. The administration for a long time said that there was not going to need to be any change in state laws to do this, and I think it's an acknowledgement, frankly, that there's massive risk and challenges that come with this sort of massive subterranean infrastructure project. I have not, I mean, as you said, it just got added onto a bill, earlier this week in the afternoon. I'm going to spend some time over the weekend. I know colleagues are, and because I think there are a few things that we have to do. Look, the state has interest, and as does the local government, as do anyone whose economic or personal livelihood depends upon the stability of infrastructure in the city of Nashville, which is a massive number of people. And so I think we got to make sure that that those risks are not being borne by the public, right? I mean, this does not need to be a one-sided deal that benefits one private company when we're talking about public land that should only be used for public benefit. And so I think people are going to look long and hard and make sure that whatever we're doing respects local governments, respects the actual rights of citizens of Tennessee, and is not a giveaway, because it's critical that it not be.
Wanted to ask about actually TWRA funding. Over the summer, they wanted to raise rates on hunting and fishing licenses, saying they need more funding to be able to be supported. GovOps kind of shot that down, and now they're asking if they can get some dedicated funding in the budget to be able to keep up with many of the responsibilities that department has. Is that something that should be considered as kind of budget talks move forward?
Well, I was on the Government Operations Committee, and there was concern about that on both sides of the aisle. So I think that's a conversation that's going to have to be had throughout the budget process. Look, I don't dispute that the TWRA plays an important role and has for some time. Now, most boards and commissions are self-sufficient, and so we'll have to look at that. And Senator Yarborough and I, as well as our colleagues, we take our fiscal duty to the people of Tennessee and the taxpayers of Tennessee very seriously. So whatever we need to do to protect Tennesseans and those paying fees to DWRA, we're going to seek to protect them first, to make sure, but also make sure that an important government agency runs as it should within its jurisdiction.
I mean, right, like the affordability of those licenses are a big deal to a lot of Tennessee families, including the family where I grew up. And that is something that I think the legislature should take seriously, but we have to be fiscally responsible, and there needs to be ways that if we're doing this, it needs to ensure that it will pay for itself, and we're not tapping into other priorities too much to subsidize this effort. I mean, one of the challenges here is that when you reduce the amount of revenue coming into the state with the tax cuts that they have, and you pile on additional needs that weren't actual needs, like the voucher program or these other sort of ideological endeavors, it takes money away from the state's ability to deal with those things. It's harder to deal with short-term financial issues that arise with various agencies, because we're now to a place where the dollars that are in the system are actually pretty critical to keeping roads working, schools operating, and state government running like it should. And so, I mean, there's a cost to fiscal irresponsibility, and I think we're going to continue seeing it arise both here and across agencies in the state.
There's some chatter that ICE may be looking at other state to build a facility after they kind of nixed the Lebanon facility. Curious if you all have heard that and your thoughts on that.
Well, you can basically guarantee that they're going to try to keep it a secret, because I think what we've learned is that there aren't a lot of communities that actually want this in their community. And that's pretty unusual in and of itself. Like, people want there to be new construction and new jobs in their communities most of the time. But regardless of what the political dynamics of communities are, you're not seeing people just bending over backwards to have one of these facilities open up. And I mean, I think that's sort of telling. And I mean, I think just from a fiscal responsibility standpoint, people have to question, like, whether this sort of flash in the pan creation in one presidential administration is a sensible long-term investment for any community to make. And so, I mean, I know everybody wants to carry the Trump administration's water around here, but at some point you got to be responsible stewards of the state and its resources and make responsible decisions that might actually last more than a couple of years. And so, I think that there's going to be pretty cold water from the people who are realistic in most of these communities when these offers or when these discussions happen. But I have no doubt that some of our colleagues will be excited to try to roll out a red carpet.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be interesting that, first of all, let's give credit to everybody who's showed up and spoke up in opposition to this, including elected leaders in Wilson County and Lebanon and those communities. But this was a community-driven opposition to that issue. And of course, Senator Marshall Blackburn's going to try to take and has tried to take credit for preventing that. But let's be honest, Wilson County is the second wealthiest county in the state per capita. And so is she going to stand up for other counties that don't have as much money? And I venture to guess that if she got the White House or whoever to change their mind about Wilson County, then she gave up something else. So I don't doubt that there may be future discussions about another location in the state of Tennessee, and I'm wondering if Senator Blackburn's willing to stand up for them and keep that type of facility out of their community as well.
There's a bill that would require municipalities to get approval from the county to annex a certain part of their city. Do you guys think this would help manage growth in these cities?
I haven't seen that bill yet, but annexation has been an ongoing discussion up here, specifically with regards to Shelby County. So whatever the aim and spirit of that legislation is, I'm unsure, so I can't really speak to it right now. I haven't seen it.
I mean, this is one of the upsides of representing Davidson County that no longer has those fights for the last 50 years. But I mean, I can tell you just from being here for years, these are perennial fights, and they're fights that end up dividing counties and cities from one another, so that they're not actually pursuing kind of common regional aims and strategies, but having more intramural disputes. And so I think that whatever we should do, we should be finding ways that we're facilitating those disputes being solved locally, as opposed to people coming up and asking the legislature to help them win fights that they can't win at home.
And I do think it's worth pointing out, actually, is that most of this annexation is an attempt to generate more tax revenue for a municipality. And that's reflective of the additional burden that the state has placed on local governments, county and city governments, that are desperate for new revenue without having to actually raise taxes in some way. Because as you know, the state of Tennessee, in their infinite wisdom, has cut most revenue sources into the state, and that trickles down. And that's less money to local governments. And so when you start cutting off money to local governments for various purposes, including the education system, they have to look for additional revenue. And that's why you're seeing a lot of conversation about a desire to annex more county property. And so again, it's a result, as to what Senator Yarborough alluded to a moment ago. It's just fiscal irresponsibility has a price. And you see it playing out in multiple ways across the state.
Well, I mean, I'm going to build on that and connect back to what Representative Clements started with today, is that a lot of what you're seeing in the legislature this year is dealing with the sort of musical chairs of who's going to end up paying for those services that we all know government needs to be doing. And if you look across committees and across the legislative agenda, you'll see numerous places where the state is trying or choosing not to fill holes that are created by the federal government this year. I mean, just today we created the infrastructure for $100 million disaster relief fund. But that's basically just because we know that FEMA is cutting staff and cutting dollars and trying to reduce its role. And let me tell you, like, while they're putting relatively big numbers in, what sound like $100 million sounds like a lot of money, the cost of Hurricane Helene or the 2010 national flood or even this most recent winter storm are dramatically larger than that. And so that's a huge burden that the state is now trying to figure out how to fill that hole. The same is true when it comes to child care, where we're not getting the child care funding that we used to. And so now, if you're trying to get in child care in Tennessee, you're facing an 8,000 person wait list. It's true when it comes to health care, where the federal government's making cuts, and that's forcing cuts downstream in the state. And so the state at the same time is choosing which things it can no longer fund and which cost it can shift over to the local governments. And so, I mean, at the end of the day, people are still going to be catching this burden one way or another, but we're doing it in a way that's trying to, not a lot of responsibility taking going on. And so I think people are passing the buck literally. Like, they're passing the responsibility for coming up with the bucks to the local governments, and it's gonna be shown in property taxes for a long time to see.
Everybody good?
Thank you all.
Thanks.